Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carradine Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2010 psychological thriller movie titled Peacock. Now, Peacock runs for 1 hour and 31 minutes long. It is directed by Michael Lander. The script was written by Michael Lander and Ryan Roy. It is produced by Barry Mendel. It is composed by Brian Reitzel, the cinematography by Philippe Rousselot, and it was edited by Sally Menke and Jeffrey M. Werner. And the stars of the movie are Cillian Murphy, Elliot Page, Susan Sarandon, Bill Pullman, Josh Lucas, Keith Carradine, and Paul Cram. So, set in the small town in the state of Nebraska called Peacock, which roughly has a population of, I would say, roughly around 800 to 900 people. In this small town, everyone knows their neighbors well enough, and it seems like everybody knows their business. It's a pretty gossipy kind of little town, where everybody knows each other's businesses. There really isn't very much privacy. But then we are introduced to a young man named John Skilpa, played always by the reliable Cillian Murphy, who mostly keeps a distance from others. In the outside world, he's a frustrated wreck who barely socializes with others. He can barely make the effort to look into their eyes, and he barely shakes anyone's hand. He has an ordinary job as a bank clerk and lives a predominantly routine life. However, very few know that he lives a double life. For a town that seems to know everyone's business, they all seem completely oblivious that John Skilpa actually has a double life. Sure, he lives alone, but John has another companion living in his estate. Her name is Emma, and she does all of his household chores like the laundry, cooks his meals, presses clothing, and more. But the thing is that Emma and John may be different. They may act different. They may sound a little bit different. But John and Emma share one thing in common. You see, they both have the same body. John poses as Emma because to him, Emma is the replacement of his deceased mother, and the motives behind the switch transformation is due to the trauma and the abuse his mother dished out on him many years ago. Now, a lot of people are wondering, why is it that John decided to take on the Emma role as a replacement to his deceased mother? Well, simple. When someone dies, it's hard to kind of overcome the grief. I mean, sometimes it's hard to just, let go and just try your best to move on with your life one step at a time. But it's not always easier, but it's not always that easier said than done. And it's not that easy to just simply let go. And that leads us to another question. His mother, who we don't know, but we can only imagine through the brief flashbacks we could clearly, easily tell that his mother was very, very abusive when he was small. She abused him physically, mentally, and maybe even sexually. And we will get more into some of the gritty stuff as we go along. So clearly in this movie, his mother is actually the villain in the story. The only problem is we don't know his mother. We don't see his mother, but from the flashbacks and from the trauma that this guy has endured most of his life, we just have no choice but to hate this bitch. After the torment that this poor guy did, she is clearly the villain in this story. The thing is that what pisses me off even more is we can't exhume our anger and our frustrations towards her because she's not here. Instead, her powers and her legacy has suddenly materialized in John's body. When he puts on the dark wig, the dress, the makeup, the stiletto heels, this could probably be a physical personification of how she probably physically looked. And maybe her personality might describe how she was in real life. But by God, his mother, make no mistake about it, was a monster. And even though she's dead, as much as it shames me to say this, I think we can all pretty much be glad she's gone. But she's not completely gone. She has actually, I guess you could say, her spirit has gone into John, who has now in his possession two personalities, two alter egos. John is, of course, he's the one who's out in the open, while Emma is a person who's in the private sector of his life. But John and Emma are two of the same people. It's two personalities in one body. And Emma, for a long time, has been a best kept secret that nobody knows. Even from a town where everybody knows each other and knows each other's businesses. Emma is a dark, hidden secret. And it's just something that John can't let go. Many people might probably say, well, now that his mother's gone, well, now he can start reliving a new life. That he could be free. That he's now empowered. And that he can now take away all the torment and harassment that his mother inflicted on him and the abuse, and to just move on, move forward, be free. Well, it's not that easy. Because there's still a part of her that's in him. Both physically and maybe even possibly psychologically. I mean, like I said, she may look different from John, act different, and sound different. But now, I guess her spirit has gotten into John. Hence the women's clothes and the wig and the stiletto heels. Emma has been a secret kept in the town of Peacock, but until one day, a train got derailed and the caboose crashed into John/Emma's backyard while he was still under the Emma alter ego. Nobody has ever seen Emma before until she almost got crushed by the caboose. Fortunately, she survived. But now people are wondering, who is this Emma? And because of this whole debacle, Emma has now become more of the dominant alter ego. She has become more exposed to the public spectrum as they assume that Emma is John's wife, usurping John. And of course, that does not sit very well for John, where his mental condition goes from bad to worse to the point that he must decide which alter ego will have to go. Obviously, both personifications cannot coexist. One has to go. And he has to make the decision whether he wants to spend the rest of his life as John and just move forward, or start a new life as Emma. But either way, no matter what, he will lose in the end. Now, as I said before, John is a very self-contained, antisocial individual who does not like making contact with other people. Now, Emma, she's not exactly what you would call the life of the party. She's not exactly, a sprite, whimsical, spontaneous, giddy, glittery kind of girl. No, she's kind of introverted, shy, although she is actually a little more approachable. And she also has a much more sweeter personality than John, who, just by the sight of seeing a human being, he would rather go into hiding. I mean, his job is a bank teller. He pretty much sits in a bank all day writing forms, hiding from the public. Has this whole big stack of papers that he has to sign and things like that, signing checks and all that other boring shit. Not exactly the exciting life, but he doesn't give a fuck. As long as he's away from people, that's better. He rides around town in his bike. And pretty much, even though the guy's roughly maybe in his mid to late 30s, he still kind of has a bit of that inner child in him. I mean, he hides many secrets, including secret stuff stashed in him, like private belongings that was given to him. But once Emma started to become more and more exposed to the public, John becomes more and more frustrated because Emma has pretty much taken over his life. And he has become kind of a shell of his former self, even though he has become kind of a shell pretty much most of his life anyway. Or maybe even all his life. But now that his Emma character seems to be getting more and more attention and more exposure, this is pissing off John to the point where his mental condition has gotten the worst of him. I mean, he's trying to make reason that Emma is not a part of his life. I mean, you know, and this also comes from the whole train caboose in his backyard, as it becomes kind of a symbol, and it becomes kind of something that comes to kind of like the center point and the backbone of what the story is about. So under the direction of Michael Lander, who also co-wrote the script with Ryan Roy, the intentions of Peacock is telling a story of a man who suffers from dissociative personality disorder, which may be good for people who like character dramas of what's it like for a person who lives with this psychological, traumatical manifesto that's in them. To get a better understanding of individuals like John/Emma and what makes them the way they are as individuals. And this is a very interesting character study because it's daring, it's original, and you probably like to know a little bit more about it. Personally, I would like to have known more about what's it like to have dissociative personality disorder. I guess it's, you know, two people who have, one person who has two different alter egos, and it could be caused due to emotional grief that has plagued them most of their lives. And once a tormentor is gone, they can never fully go away. Instead, they kind of like transfer their spirits inside the certain individual who ends up just living his life and her life. That kind of explains the John-Emma dynamic. Now I'm going to tell you something here. This movie runs for an hour and 31 minutes long. And this is kind of like the red herring in this movie. The execution seems a bit choppy in some areas. Very, very rushed too. And it seems like sometimes John and Emma's transformation seems to be way too casual and way too right at the minute. I would expect it to see a little bit of sloppiness in Emma's makeup job. Probably I would love to see maybe just a moment where maybe her wig got a bit loose. Sure, it would end up losing its psychological thriller aspects to make it more comical. Obviously, this movie is not a comedy at all. There's nothing funny about what's going on. This is not some silly guy who's wearing women's clothes or who's being some kind of a trendsetter to the modern day thinking machine. Okay? This is not about condoning guys that, it's okay to wear a dress. Obviously, he's not wearing the dress to be a trendsetter. He's not wearing a dress to be silly and goofy either. There is something really wrong with John and Emma. And it's not about the cross-dressing thing. It's because this guy has been traumatized most of his life. And the person who has tormented him, he just can't simply let go. But I wish it would have been explained a lot more. But instead, scenes get rushed and everything seems to just be so superficially perfect. When John switches from John to Emma, it just seems so soon. It's like it would probably take, I mean, did he hesitate to take his clothes off and put on the Emma clothes? It probably would have took hours to do that. But no. I mean, like, when Maggie came over and asked her about for a loan because she wants to take her and her son out of Peacock because there's really nothing for them there, and that she's got extended friends and family who live in I think it was Madison, Wisconsin. John didn't know what the fuck she was talking about, but then when he goes upstairs, puts on his Emma personification, and it just seems like she just organically understands what he's going through. How can Emma understand what she's going through when John can't? You see, it just seems too casual, and it just seems too superficial in many, many areas. And sure, the levels of intrigue seems to have caught the attention to great detail, but most of it is crammed into a 90-minute film, and the details just seem a bit rushed at times. And although Cillian Murphy, I got nothing personal against Cillian Murphy. Cillian Murphy just nailed it to perfection. And being that, he's an Irish-born actor, it was great that he kind of had a bit of that Nebraska twang, which he did quite well. Or at least he concealed his Irish accent, which was really, really good. Very impressed. I actually did thought that the performance were decent as a whole, especially from Susan Sarandon, Keith Carradine, Elliot Page, and Bill Pullman. But the only real true connection of the John and Emma character is from the small role Josh Lucas has in his role as police officer Tom McGonigal. And like I said, even Cillian Murphy does everything to even conceal himself. One of Cillian Murphy's trademarks is that he's got these icy blue eyes. And then you look at John and Emma, and I noticed their eyes are brown. Now, according to this, the director put brown contact lenses in Murphy's eyes so that he can be a brown-eyed guy instead of a blue-eyed guy to make him even more unrecognizable. You could have just kept him as a blue-eyed person. It doesn't seem to really matter, but I guess that's what they did here. What makes this film implausible is that Murphy just seems to transform his John and Emma personalities too unnaturally, all of a sudden without much hesitation. It seems way too casual at times. And it happens way too soon. Yeah, I understand it's a work of fiction, and unless you have a PhD in psychology, I shouldn't judge his character unless I fully understand the motives behind someone who's been diagnosed with dissociative personality disorder. I'm not going to say I have a PhD in psychology. I've dabbled in the field of psychology, but but mostly as an extracurricular mark. I had to kind of go out of my usual stick. I fully understand the motives behind someone who's been diagnosed with the illness. And it's great that Murphy can transform into Emma and making us convinced that it's not just Cillian Murphy wearing women's clothes. Like I said, there's no trend setting. There's no spokesmodel for cross-dressing guys and drag queens here. No. This person has an illness, and he's hiding, and he has a personality that he just can't fully get rid of. And that he must decide which character he must choose to spend the rest of his life with, because two personalities cannot coexist in one body. One has to go. And that he struggles to find out which one should stay or which one should go. But there's also a few other things that I also found illogical. I don't understand how can a small town like Peacock, Nebraska, where everybody knows each other and their personal lives, had never seen or heard of Emma, or know that John and Emma are the same person. I mean, they still think, do they ever sometimes see John and Emma together? Do you ever see John and Emma posing in a photograph together, or John using some kind of Photoshop to juxtapose his John character and his Emma character together to look like they're in the same setting? Of course, you can't really do that because this movie is a period piece. I mean, it is set around, I don't know, I think the late 50s, early 60s, I'm not sure. But how can people be sort of this shallow? And yet these are some of the nosiest people around. It's also frustrating that two people who know John more personally, like Officer Tom McGonigal and Maggie Bailey, played by Elliot Page, are also clueless that John lives two lives and has the same frame of mind like the other citizens in town, that they believe John and Emma are a married couple. And this leads me up to the Maggie Bailey character. So she shows up at the door, and she is the key or the catalyst to everything that tries to make sense in this movie about his past. You see, apparently John and Maggie had a one-night stand. So that means that John is not a virgin. He might be an anti-socialite who doesn't really like people too much, or doesn't like to interact with people too much. But at the same time, he also was once in a relationship with this Maggie. But it wasn't out of pleasure, or it wasn't because he was drunk. From what I gather, his mother forced him and Maggie to have sex. And that her son, Jake, is John's biological son. But I still don't understand how even these two not know that John and Emma are the same people. I mean, from the distance, I can tell that Emma is John in drag. But how can nobody can spot the obvious? I can go with the narrative if they thought John and Emma were siblings. I mean, they could have said they were brother and sister, And I could have believed that more. And I could side with them being confused. But as a married couple, it's not very convincing that makeup and wig, Emma still physically looks too much like John. I mean, it's common sense, folks. Susan Sarandon is in this role. She does a fine job. Like I said, I have nothing against the acting here. She plays the role of a woman's rights advocate or a suffragette who also runs a women's shelter. And she, although puts in a great performance, her character feels very shallow and forced. She can't possibly be this shallow due to her professional job surrounded by mostly women and not knowing that it's a man posing as a woman. That just doesn't make sense. John's frustrations even stem from his own mental instabilities as well. Because John and Emma are one of the same person. Like I said, their personalities are contrary to one another. And sometimes their actions, neither one of them seem to have a clue as to what they're doing. I mean, there may be one body with two identities, but also their personalities seem to be different from one another. John, and the worst thing is that John never seems to remember Emma's actions, and Emma feels the same way with John. So the train that crashes into the Skilpa's backyard makes for a rally as Mayor Ray Krill, played by Keith Carradine, wants to use John's backyard to support the incumbent candidate in their run for senator. And Mayor Krill, of course, wants to run for another term as mayor. So the best thing they want to do is to use this caboose as a way to prop up their campaign so that Mayor Krill can have another term, while the other incumbent candidate could make his run or her run for senator. And this is where you see the personality clashes come into effect. Whereas John wants everybody just to go away. Get the fuck off my property. Maybe he may not say that like in that kind of way, but I'm sure that if he had his way, he would. I mean, he even tries to call a company to have this caboose removed. And that money is not the problem. Even if it costs a lot of money to get this caboose off his property, he'll pay at any lengths necessary. But by way of contrast, Emma, who also seems to come across as being quite introverted, but much more sweeter, she actually allows this to become the break. She allows the mayor to, make his rounds and his campaigns around the area to get voters in. She actually permits them. And of course, this really upsets John, who eventually becomes so unsettling, especially at the office, where he gets so frustrated, he breaks into an emotional meltdown and almost passes out. And yet everyone around him calmly tries to persuade him and to just let it prevail. Although he just wants everyone gone, Emma, who has now become kind of more dominant and more inviting, seems like she's just letting them do it. Much to John's chagrin. And because of all this, his routines seem to be distracted. Because everybody seems to rather prefer the company of Emma than the company of John. So John is pretty much almost at his wit's end. So the script, which was also co-written by Ryan Roy, it doesn't have much ambition. That's kind of the thing that what makes me upset about this movie. It just puts the Maggie character into the mix just so that it could create some sort of superficial revelations regarding John's character and shocking events from his troubled past. Now, Jake, of course, as we all know, is the son of John. But of course, we all know that if Jake was in the company of John, obviously that wasn't going to work. Now with Emma, we could assume that it probably would have been a whole different story. But obviously John, no. John's too messed up to be the carer of a child. Now John is practically a child himself. So would Emma be a better parental figure for little Jake? We'll soon see. I mean, it's not to say that Peacock is awkward in its storytelling, but the dramatic undertones needed were absent throughout. I mean, very little thought was put into the very important backstory of the relationship between John and his abusive mother, and how the stress factor came into place inside John's mind, knowing the predicament he never wanted to begin with. So then we come to the end of the story. When we come to the end of the story, well, John tries to persuade Maggie to take a job at the bank where she can make a lot of money, or she can make at least a decent salary. Obviously, her original thought was to go to Fanny Krill's women's shelter, but Maggie didn't want to go there because the women there are not ambitious. She tries to get Maggie to work at the bank, but then that didn't do good. There was some interactions between Emma, Maggie, and Jake. The end was kind of a bit weird. So Emma goes to a bar to drink. She also takes John's clothes. And suddenly some guy went up to a hotel And apparently the guy attempted to rape Emma. And I believe for a very brief time, John/Emma also starts to identify himself as Maggie Bailey. So what does he do? He kills a man, sets it on fire, sets the hotel room on fire, eventually faking John's death. So now that John is no longer, since John is no longer going to be this individual's alter ego, now he's decided that he's going to live the rest of his life as Emma. So, but then, of course, since Emma is the alter ego to John, she realizes eventually that Jake is not in the safe hands of Emma either. And that Emma is just as much of a monster as John's mother. So then after realizing this, he decides to give Maggie the money and telling her to get out of Peacock as fast as possible because it's not safe there. The town is not exactly a place. The town is not exactly a place to stay. But worst part is being under his company or her company is not good, because she's just going to eventually inflict the same kind of abuse on Jake, just like what his mother did to him when he was small. So she gives him the money to go off to Madison, and he eventually decides to just remain Emma for the rest of his life and to just stay in isolation. When they start knocking on his door, or her door, since he's no longer John, Emma just refuses to come out and has decided to become just as much of a recluse as John. And I guess this is kind of how it ends there. Well, it's not to say that Peacock is a convoluted train wreck of a movie, but it's not the abomination, and it's not the abomination as I made it out to be. There are some good things about it. Could have been fleshed out better had the runtime been a little bit longer. But there are a myriad of flaws that needed to be pointed out, mainly due to the movie having an original story and some wonderful ideas to boot. However, the execution of the characters handled here are way too vague and not fully fleshed out. The ending of the movie has some climactic moments to some extent fell into place, but it's a shame we waited that long for some disclosure to happen. So when all is said and done, I do recommend to see this movie, but I'm not expecting you to get some kind of high expectations out of it. So when all is said and done, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Peacock a 6 out of 10. So I guess this ends my ride review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carradine saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.